Today I'm going to teach you how to make this easy flannel baby blanket. Seriously, if you can sew a straight line, you can make this blanket. It's really, really simple. It's my go-to DIY baby shower gift. Everybody loves it. It's the perfect size, nice and big. It uses 1.5 yards of each fabric. So it's great for just like throwing on the floor, but also thin enough that you can just put it in the diaper bag. And since you're choosing your own fabric, you can make coordinating items like burp cloths and things to really make a big impact with your baby gift. So let's get started. I'm gonna walk you through step by step on how to make this easy flannel baby blanket. To make the blanket, you will need 1.5 yards each of the front fabric that you want for the blanket and the back, and these are both flannel. You'll also need coordinating thread, some sharp scissors or a rotary cutter, and of course your sewing machine. Make sure you wash and dry your fabric first, just in case there's any shrinking, and go ahead and iron all of it so it's nice and straight before you do any cutting. Cut your 2 pieces of fabric so that they are exactly the same size. I don't do any measuring here because I've got 1.5 yards of each fabric. Just make sure that they're the same width and that all of your lines are nice and straight, and that they're both the same size. And then lay them out on top of each other, straighten everything out, and you want right sides together. So that means that the print and the softer side of your flannel will be together facing each other. Next, pin around the entire blanket, all 4 sides. Next, you'll want to start sewing on one of the edges, and I like to start in the middle of an edge, not on the corner, and I actually like to start on the bottom, and that's just a preference. So starting at the bottom of your blanket, go forward a little bit, go back, and I'm doing a 1/2 inch seam here. So I'm going right along the edge of the presser foot. You can make it a little bit bigger if you want. That's just what I prefer to do. So then just continue sewing a 1/2 inch seam around the entire outer edge of the blanket. But when you get back, don't go all the way back to where you started from. You want to leave a few inches of a gap so that you can turn the blanket right side out. When you get to a corner, stop a 1/2 inch before the end. Pick up your presser foot, turn the fabric, put the presser foot back down, and then continue sewing. Okay, now I'm almost back to where I started. You can see the thread right here is where I started, but I'm just going to stop here and leave a 5 inch gap where it is not sewn, and just back stitch a little bit and forward stitch to lock that in place. Lift the needle and take that off your sewing machine. Once you've got that all sewn together, you want to go to each of the corners and clip them off. Make sure you're getting kind of close to the stitching there, but don't get so close that you're going to cut through it. Do that for each of the 4 corners. Next, you want to take that gap and kind of put your hand inside and turn the whole blanket right side out by pulling it through the gap in that stitching. Once you have that all turned right side out, put your hand inside the blanket and poke out each of the 4 corners. And I like to take just a crochet hook that I have sitting around. You want something that has a point on it, but that's not sharp. Put that inside of the blanket, and then use that to really poke out those corners. Next, straighten out all the sides and iron around the whole edge of the blanket to make the seams lie flat. Next, we're going to be sewing a top stitch around the whole edge of the blanket, and that will sew this part that we left open. It will sew that shut. So make sure that when you ironed it, that you ironed the seams down on the part that is open. If you're a beginner, I recommend just doing a straight stitch, but if you're more advanced and you're used to sewing, you can choose a decorative stitch. I like to use this wavy stitch here. On my machine, it's stitch 22, and then I go up here and I've changed my stitch length to a 3. You don't have to do that. I recommend practicing on a piece of scrap fabric to get the desired look. I'm starting at the top of my opening here. So here is the opening because I want to make sure that I get this close. That's going to be the most important part of the top stitch around the blanket. And you want to sew as close as you can to this edge as possible. If I were doing a straight stitch, that would mean I'd probably be just right on this. There's a line on my presser foot. I think it's probably like a 1/4 of an inch seam. So you want to be as close as you can without going off the edge of the blanket here. Since I'm doing a decorative stitch, I've got to move that in a little bit, and that's why I recommend only using the decorative stitch if you are more experienced. So go ahead and just stitch around, closing this seam up, and stitch around the entire edge of the blanket. Next, we need to sew 4 spots on the blanket. A lot of people like to tie blankets like this so that when they are in the wash, the fabric doesn't separate. I just like to sew 4 little darts in it. And to mark those spots, you can measure it, but I don't like to measure things. So what we'll do is fold the blanket in thirds. Either way, it doesn't matter. So I've got it folded in thirds. Let me show you the end so you can see what I mean. I folded the top down and then the bottom up like this, and then fold it in thirds the other direction. It does not need to be precise. No one's going to be measuring your blanket. So now you can see I've got it folded in thirds, and then I want to go, I'm turning it over, and all the places where there's going to be 4 spots up here on top where the folds intersect. And that is where I'm going to mark 4 spots with pins on these 4 corners. Make sure you're only pinning through the top layer of the fabric. Try to show you, I know it's hard with this camera view being so small, but the top of my blanket is up there. I've got a pin here and here, and then here and here. So they're all evenly separated throughout the blanket in 4 spots in the middle. So now to make the little darts, I'm going to use my zigzag stitch on my machine. That's number 4. And then you need to change the stitch length to super small. So I'm changing that to a 0.5. And what that does, it makes the zigzag just be really close together. Instead of showing a zigzag, it'll make kind of a square, and you'll see. Bring your blanket under the presser foot to one of those pins that you marked off. You want the stitches to not be very noticeable at all. So depending on what color your backing is, you'll want to match the bobbin thread to this color backing. So I've got a light gray thread on here that I've been using already. That's my bobbin thread. And then on the top, if I was going to be on one of these mountains, I would change the thread to black. That way it doesn't show up as much. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to change my thread to black for this particular dart that I'm sewing. Okay, so I'm going to be sewing on this little black mountain here, and hopefully it's not too hard for you to see. I've got my zigzag set at a 0.5 length. And I'm going to press on my presser foot until it's stitched about 8 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it's going to go forward just slightly because my zigzag stitch is really short. Now I'm going to back up and do the same and do about 8 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then lift up my needle, pull up the presser foot, pull that off of there. So hopefully you can see right there the little square that made. A little bit of the black thread from the front does come through, but that's okay. This is the back of the blanket and I don't really care that much. So just continue to do that for all 4 of the pins that you have. This one's going to be on white, so I'll change my top thread to white for that one and just do the same for the other 2. Once you're done sewing those, go ahead and go around front and back and snip off all the extra threads, and then you are done with your baby blanket. I hope you had fun making this easy baby blanket. Once you get the first one done, all of them are going to be a breeze, so sometimes even when there's a sale, I like to stock up and make a bunch of them. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments below, and subscribe to my blog and my channel for more fun craft ideas.